Today's essential question, which is number 4 out of 4 total, is what role do genetic drift, bottleneck effect, and the founder effect play in evolution? We have three things here: genetic drift, the bottleneck effect, and the founder effect. What role do these three things play in evolution? Let's start by listing some factors that drive evolution other than natural selection. Because populations can be changed by factors other than natural selection. For example, a natural disaster, such as a volcanic eruption, may randomly eliminate part of a population. Random changes can produce evolutionary change. These types of changes include gene flow, genetic drift, founder effects, and bottleneck effects. Gene flow, for example, describes the movement of alleles into and out of a gene pool. For example, a beetle may migrate from one area to another. In doing so, it may move and transfer its alleles from one population to another. It may introduce new alleles into that population. Gene flow can therefore change the genetic variety and or frequency within a population. Gene flow can also make genetically dissimilar populations more alike. This will reduce the chance of these populations evolving into separate species. Populations isolated from others will experience little or no gene flow. They are more likely to evolve into separate species. From one generation to the next, the number of individuals carrying particular alleles in a population at equilibrium fluctuates randomly around a mean or average. This change in allelic frequency within a given population is called genetic drift. In a large population, random genetic drift has a small impact on gene frequency. In smaller populations, the gene frequency may fluctuate more widely. In a small population, it is possible that, through random genetic drift, a gene may be lost altogether. Unlike natural selection, this is a random process. Forms of genetic drift include the founder and bottleneck effects. So, what happens when a few individuals from a population leave and find a new population elsewhere? By chance, the small colonizing population may have a different allele frequency than the original population as a whole. As the new population grows, its gene pool will represent that of the founding individuals. This phenomenon is called the founder effect. For example, Dutch settlers in southern Africa are mainly descended from an original group of colonists. Now, purely by chance, this small population of colonists had an unusually high frequency of the gene that causes Huntington's disease. Today, the descendants of this group exhibit a similar high frequency of the disease. When the size of a population is quickly and dramatically reduced because of a factor like a natural disaster, a bottleneck effect can occur. The smaller, surviving population may have a different allele frequency than the larger population. The number of alleles are usually reduced. Even if the new, smaller population were to grow in number again, the population's allele frequency would match that of the survivors rather than the original population. The bottleneck effect can greatly reduce the genetic variation of a population. For example, the African cheetah is a species with a low genetic diversity. Using DNA analysis, scientists have determined that the species almost became extinct and went through a bottleneck around 10,000 years ago. So, all of today's African cheetahs are descendants of just a few survivors of this near extinction event.
Another way that evolution can occur is by genetic drift. Let's go there. As opposed to natural selection, which is when evolution occurs due to a condition in the environment, genetic drift is when evolution occurs due to random chance.
The effect of genetic drift is small in large populations, but large in small populations. So we'll use a small population to start. Oops, these 4 rats fall off a cliff. These 4 survive to reproduce. The genes of the population from here on out are only going to come from these 4 rats, so whatever traits they've got, the future generations will get. Any traits that only the ones that fell had are no longer in the species gene pool. That's genetic drift.
Genetic drift can create a change in allele frequencies over time. As we mentioned, this effect is much more pronounced in small populations than in larger populations. Remember, genetic drift is due to random chance, while natural selection is driven by the fitness of certain alleles in a given environment.
Here are 2 extreme examples of genetic drift: the population bottleneck and Founder's effect.
A population bottleneck occurs when a very large percentage of a population is wiped out, leaving the rest of the species to develop from the genes of the small group of survivors.
Did you know that there is a great example of this bottleneck effect in human history? Based on studies of mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome DNA, and lots of other genes, it is estimated that our latest population bottleneck occurred about 70,000 years ago, around the time that the Toba supervolcano exploded in Indonesia and wrought massive destruction. Everyone in the world today is descended from a population of 15,000 people who survived. Consequently, and due to several other bottleneck episodes, humans have much less genetic variability as a population than do all other primates.
The other extreme example of genetic drift is Founder's effect. Founder's effect occurs when a small subgroup splits off from a larger population, and the smaller population ends up with a different genetic makeup than the larger group. In this case, unusual genes can become the norm, since they represent a higher percentage of the gene pool. Even if one person has an unusual allele, it can become highly represented in this smaller group.
A well-studied case of Founder's effect occurred in the Pennsylvania Amish, a group who broke off from their original European population. 2 of the original founders carried an allele for Ellis-Van Creveld syndrome, which is characterized by heart defect, skeletal defects, and polydactyly, which means extra digits on the hand or foot. The prevalence of this allele among the Amish is many hundreds of times greater than any general population. So interesting.
So genetic drift is based on random chance. Think about it like this. A species is traveling down its evolutionary path, la-di-da, following the twists and turns of natural selection. Say a new path suddenly sprouts off the main one in a different direction. This new direction represents a drastic change in the possibilities of the gene pool. Notice that, as opposed to natural selection, genetic drift occurs in the gene pool via a change in genotype rather than phenotype.
At this point, you should be able to generate a response to today's essential question. What role do genetic drift, the bottleneck effect, and the founder effect play in evolution? Please press pause on the video and write your response to today's essential question in the summary box at the bottom of your notes.